Harrison Price from the Historic Wall Center, and this next interview brought to you by Mr. Lube. Mr. Lube and Tires. Change your oil, change your wipers event is on now. Visit MrLube.com. Download your coupon for a free pair of Goodyear hybrid wiper blades with any oil change. Only for a limited time at Mr. Lube with 18 locations in the Lower Mainland. Jeff Patterson, our Canucks reporter, the host of Rink-Wide Vancouver, joins us on the first Canucks game day of the new season. Kind of. Jeff, how you doing?
You have to ask. It's hockey season. Come on. Yes, I won't be in Penticton for Young Stars. I'll make my way for main camp. So getting my hooks into hockey will be delayed by a handful of days, but I'll be an interested observer from a distance, obviously, at Young Stars, and we'll see how that provides a springboard for some of these prospects into the main camp that starts on Thursday.
And of course, we'll do the scouting for you because we're going to be there for Young Stars.
We're going to be there.
So we'll have
trustworthy sources on the scene.
Yes.
Hey, how about Manny Malhotra being back in the Canucks colors? That was fun to hear from Manny yesterday as head coach of the Abbotsford Canucks.
Yeah, and I had a chance to be around him out at development camp in the summer, and that was his first chance to be on the ice. And it must be bizarre for a guy coming back into the fold to step onto the ice at the summer development camp at UBC. You'd be familiar with a few of the names, but putting faces to names and then finding out a little bit more about each of these players. And if you remember the summer development camp, they had to bring in a bunch of invitees because they didn't have enough sort of prospects in the system to really round out two full teams. So it was a reduced scrimmage. It was a reduced camp. And some of the guys that were at that camp aren't part of the fold here. So for Manny, there's been a bunch of learnings going on here, trying to identify the players that he's got to work with and how many he'll have in Abbotsford for the upcoming hockey season. But he sounded excited just watching and listening to his sort of post-first practice interview, working the rust off from summer hockey and trying to get guys focused and on task. And now it's 3 games in 4 nights with a bunch of prospects. And ultimately the outcome isn't the most important thing here. It really is trying to drill down on systems and just get guys thinking the way that Manny wants them to play, especially for the ones that he's going to have under his care in Abbotsford all season long out in the AHL.
We've always said this about youngsters, though. I do want to see moments, right? You're right. The totality of a game, reviews of an entire game, those are really tough and perhaps unfair for young guys thrown together like this. But I do want to see those flashes of something of what you look like at your best if you're a young player.
Without a doubt. And I always think, too, from a coaching perspective, you get a power play and you're just throwing guys that they haven't had a chance to work on the special teams. So I think you just lean on your most skilled players and hope that their instincts carry them in those situations. Look, there's going to be a ton of eyes on Jonathan Lekkerimaki. Mine will be there as well. This is the featured performer for the Vancouver Canucks. But beyond that, and I thought it was great that Manny and the coaching staff put Lekkerimaki with Atu Ratu and Archdeep Bains on day one of practice. Put him in a position to succeed. Set him up with guys that have been there and done that, have both played in the National Hockey League, albeit briefly, but had fine seasons in the American Hockey League. These are experienced players at a showcase like this one. Ratu at center, I think, is interesting because he finished the season strong in Abbotsford, but he did it on the wing. And so I was curious to see organizationally, where did they have him slotted? And it looks like they've got him back in the middle. So he's one of the guys that I have high hopes for. Bains and Sasson, obviously, older players, experienced players. Archie Bains was an AHL All-Star last year, and here he is at Young Stars again. And then defensively, Elias Pettersson, D. Petey, I'm really excited to see what he looks and does in his first full season here in North America. And the other guy that I'm going to have my eye on this weekend and then on to main camp is Kirill Kudryavtsev, who has impressed every time I've seen him. He's had strong showings in Penticton in the past. He looked good out at the summer development camp in UBC. He's ready to turn pro if there's a spot for him on the Abbotsford roster this year. So there's another guy that I would have high hopes for at a weekend like this in the South Okanagan.
Jeff, do you think there's any chance of a Bains or a Lekkerimaki or a Ratu making this team out of camp, or is the presence of Amon, Phil DiGiuseppe, and Sammy Blais on a PTO, are they blockers to any of the young guys making this team out of camp?
Yeah, when it comes to the numbers game, I think they're in tough. But that's what camp is for ultimately, and the preseason as well. But I think it's safe to say that they would have to have a Herculean effort to really set themselves apart. And we know this much with this management group. When it comes to Lekkerimaki, they want this guy to be the player that they think he is. But we've also seen they have built out the player development staff. They lean on the farm system. They sent Hoaglander down. They sent Podkolzin down. And we're in no rush to bring those guys back to the National Hockey League. And so for Lekkerimaki, I think adjusting to North American ice, playing against pros over here, although he has played professionally in Sweden, I think there's still a fair bit of growth in his game that if he doesn't touch NHL ice this year, it's not a disappointment. If he does, it means that he has done the things that this organization wants to see from him. But I think he's a long shot, especially out of camp. Injuries, nobody can predict, right? And opportunities may present themselves somewhere along the road. But just those players that you mentioned towards the bottom of the lineup, all of those guys have NHL experience. Sammy Blais should be motivated. I'm curious to see what he looks like and what he can do, and ultimately how he approaches life on a PTO here. You have to make an impression. You're starting behind and you have to rise above. Good isn't going to be good enough for a player on a PTO. He has to bump somebody that's under contract right now to earn his opportunity. So he should be hungry. And when he's on his game, he can be a pain to play against. And we'll see if we see shades of that from a guy like Sammy Blais at main camp.
Weaving together these last two answers, do you think, and maybe it's just the simplest answer is it's on an individual case basis here, but does the relationship change between the NHL club and the AHL club now that Manny is there? Do you think that how they treat these kids in terms of looks up and all, do you think that Manny Malhotra changes how that all works?
I don't. I think they felt really comfortable with Jeremy Colliton, a guy that had NHL head coaching experience. Look, Manny's got to prove himself.
Yeah, true.
And I mean, oodles of playing experience and assistant coaching experience, but this is a new role for him. And so I think there'll be learnings on both sides, but I don't think fundamentally having this coach, a different coach in place at Abbotsford, changes the mindset of the management group that oversees the entire operation here. They lean on their minor league affiliate. It's here in Abbotsford now. It's a lot easier logistically, obviously, than it was when it was in Utica. And we've seen them make pretty good use of the farm system here, whether it's just bringing in guys for a game or two or guys that have earned their opportunity. In the case of an Arshdeep Bains, have a look, see what he can do. Although I still maintain for Arshdeep Bains, his NHL debut is the best he has looked at the big league level. Since then, I think there's been a little bit of slippage in his two brief stints in the National Hockey League, but he's a hungry guy. He's motivated. He's shown that he's a quick learner. He'll be better for those two opportunities. And so I would expect that he'll have a strong weekend in Penticton and carry that over into main camp. But yeah, whether it's Ratu, whether it's Bains, whether it's Lekkerimaki, I think all those guys are destined to start the season in the American Hockey League and then have to prove themselves and work their way back up unless the Canucks run into some sort of rash of injuries through the preseason.
Jeff, we were having the conversation yesterday with where the club is positioned in its competitive cycle. Would you be willing to move Lekkerimaki or Wielander this year? Are they untouchable in your eyes, or are they pieces that the Canucks should consider moving in the right deal for the benefit of the big club?
Feels to me like it's all about winning now. And when you look at 2 more years of Thatcher Demko and 3 years of Quinn Hughes, that kind of feels like the real timeline. Now, they've committed to others, obviously, much longer, and they're going to have a decision on Brock Besser. I get that. And so you can never lock it down to a 1 or 2 year window, but Quinn Hughes is going to double and then some his salary, right? Like that is going to change the landscape for the Vancouver Canucks, who are already dealing with one massive contract in Elias Pettersson, and there's going to be a bigger one coming for Quinn Hughes, and what happens with Demko. So there's some uncertainty down the line. I get the cap's going up, all of that, but they've got players locked into contracts that are team friendly. You know, it's funny, always before the start of the season, you read these best value contracts in the National Hockey League, and they're always guys that are on league minimum or $1.5 million. Quinn Hughes is one of the best value contracts in the National Hockey League, hands down, full stop, making what he's making right now and delivering Norris trophies and 92 points. But that's not going to last a whole lot longer, but they do have 3 more years of Quinn Hughes at this team-friendly price point. So if it is all about making this team in the here and now better, I don't think you can look at anybody as untouchable, although I will say for a team that has been without a young right-shot defenseman seemingly forever, going back to Chris Tanev, I suppose, as a guy that they've groomed, and before that, Kevin Bieksa, Willander seems more untouchable to me than Lekkerimäki. I just think, given the position, the handedness, all those types of things. But look, if they move either one of them, next year's young stars, we're going to be talking about 24 and 25-year-old players again, because there really isn't a ton in the pipeline. There are some pieces. There are some guys that they hope continue to grow and develop into National Hockey Leaguers. But in terms of frontliners, we all know that there just aren't a whole lot of prospects there. And Lekkerimäki is certainly one of them. He's the shining piece heading into this week in Penticton. And so I'd hate to see them trade a player like that. But at the same time, if it's about winning the Stanley Cup, and that is the demand of another team, it depends what the Canucks are getting in return. But no, I can't sit here and say that I think, in the eyes of management, that Jonathan Lekkerimäki is untouchable at this stage.
Improving this team is going to be interesting going forward, and perhaps it will reveal itself as the season goes on. But there's not an obvious contract that fans are clamoring to get off the books right now. For years, that was the case. There was, a couple of beacons on the roster. Oh, we want to move on from that contract. Jeff, I was looking at it, even if they wanted to trade a big name, a big time prospect, a first round pick, it has to be tied to something to bring in a player of import for the cap space purposes. And I'm not sure who's so obvious to be moving out right now. I mean, again, if somebody has a stinker of a start to the season, perhaps that reveals itself. But right now, for the first time in forever, Jeff, you look at the roster and you think, I'm okay with everybody right now starting the season.
Right. I mean, for how many years was there a segment of the fan base that truly was counting down to July 1st, 2024, so that Tyler Myers would be off the books?
Right.
And then they go and commit 3 more years to him at half of his previous salary. But that's not a salary. Yeah, he's still here in some form or fashion. Obviously, the Brock Besser watch is on now, and that one's going to be curious to see how it plays out. But given the season that he had, he strikes me as a pretty integral part of what they've got going on here. And I don't see this idea of the Canucks being competitive and yet getting the trade deadline and moving Brock Besser. Like, you just don't see competitive, contending teams move a massive piece like that, especially their leading goal scorer from the previous season. And so you're right. I guess if Lekkerimäki continues to develop as a right shot goal scorer, Connor Garland, another year burned off his contract. Is Garland a contract that they'd be looking to get off of just to create some cap space? And yet we saw it's unconventional with Connor Garland, but how effective he can be and what a play driver he is and the chemistry that he's got with Dakota Joshua. So you're right. There's not an obvious candidate, that one albatross of a contract that everybody would love to see moved somehow, some way. But they still don't have the cap flexibility that Jim Rutherford spoke about on day one when he took over and sort of pounded the desk about getting the cap cushion was the word he used then. They're still up against it and still hamstrung to the point that there isn't a lot of flexibility there.
There's also still no practice facility and still maroon seats at Rogers Arena. So there's a lot of things that are lingering here. Jeff, Kevin Lankinen and the situation at goal. First of all, tell me what happened at Milford, because it very much looked like Thatcher Demko was held out of that. And secondly, where are you in terms of fortifying the crease, whether that's Kevin Lankinen or someone else, if there's uncertainty around Thatcher Demko's ability to be ready for the home opener?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's so much uncertainty around Thatcher Demko, and I think there was on Monday as well. There was some suggestion that he may have been at Johnny and Matthew Gaudreau's funeral. He was a teammate of both at Boston College, and that would be totally understandable if he was on hand there. But to the best of my knowledge, he wasn't at the Northview Golf and Country Club for the Jake Milford for whatever reason. Arthur Silovs was. Now, this is the burning question. Less than a week out from main camp. They're on the ice on Thursday up in Penticton. And guys, it's just been such a wild summer with Thatcher Demko, who pushed so hard to get back. And I mean, game day storyline, game 7 against Edmonton was he going to be a surprise starter? Ultimately, he wasn't. But if the Canucks had got through, was he going to be ready for the Dallas series? And now here we are on the cusp of training camp, and he's not ready for camp, and we're still not certain whether there was a procedure, and if so, what? Like, the uncertainty is wild. And we know, and we've seen it elsewhere, that you can put together a powerhouse team, you can stack your roster and it can all be undone in a real hurry if you don't have goaltending. And I say this with all due respect to Artur Silovs, who was terrific in the playoffs. He has 9 regular season games under his belt. Yep. He has more playoff performances now than he does regular season. And just go back to Spencer Martin, who earned a contract to be a backup and I think would have been a totally fine and capable, competent backup. But the minute the starter goes down and you're thrust into that number 1 position and you know it, I almost feel like Silovs was thrown off the deep end in the playoffs and didn't even have time to really process it all. Just get out there and play. But if you know you're going to be the guy night in, night out in the regular season, Spencer Martin wasn't up to the challenge. Colin Delia wasn't up to the challenge. Those guys weren't built to be NHL starters, and we'll see about Artur Silovs. I think there's higher hopes organizationally for Silovs, but it is a different calculus altogether when you're asked to be the starter in the absence of your number 1 guy. And look, when Thatcher Demko is healthy and on his game, as good as anybody in the NHL, was the runner-up to Connor Hellebuck for the Vezina. Remember the first 6 weeks or so last year, he was lights out good, was such a huge part of the reason the Canucks got off to the start they did. Now he got a ton of run support as well. Just about everything fell the Canucks' way in the first 6 weeks of the season. But here we are, and nobody knows. And that's the thing. Like, Thatcher Demko is going to get healthy. He'll play. My question isn't, when are we going to see him? It's more about, can he stay healthy now? And I think that's where the conversation has moved with this player, unfortunately, who, again, when he is healthy and on his game, pretty much the best in the business. But injuries are now part of the Thatcher Demko story, whether he likes it or not. And it's my understanding he doesn't like it and is sort of fed up with this idea that he's injury prone. And yet, is he available? Was he available in the playoffs?
Yeah. I hope in his own mind, guys, that he realizes that 50 games is probably where he should be. Like, goalies love to believe that they can pull a Roberto Luongo and start 72 games a season. I hope Demko, after all of this, is just honest with himself, and nobody's doubting his greatness, but his greatness should be reduced to 50 games in the regular season so that he can play in the playoffs. And you hope that he's at peace with that in his own mind.
Well, and you always come back to availability, right? You can be great on paper. We can talk about your greatness, but if you can't be there to prove it, this is the one thing. He had the bubble where he was thrown in sort of a la Silovs, but he hasn't had a start-to-finish playoff run in the National Hockey League. And here all these other guys last spring got this experience that they had been lacking of postseason hockey, the Stanley Cup playoffs with fans in the stands, not the whatever that was in the bubble a few years ago. And so a lot of these guys now have that as a baseline to lean on. And Thatcher Demko, who was there and traveling and around the team, but made the first start on night 1 against Nashville, and that was it for him. So I hope, I'm with you, Blake, that I hope there's a mindset shift here. We know how competitive he is. We've heard from Canucks management about how, they've had to pull him off the ice. And if that's the case, so be it. Step in. Somebody's going to have to say, whoa, like, it's not about being at your best in November and early December. We need you around to prove your greatness when the chips are truly down after the regular season. And so really, I mean, on so many levels, interested to see when we see him back on the ice, how quickly can he get back to game speed? Because we saw how hard he worked, and he talked about, he thanked the medical staff for coming in late at night and 2-a-days in his rehab to get ready for those games just before the playoffs. And ultimately he was back for 3 games and then he was gone again. So just a ton of uncertainty. And to your question, Matt, ultimately about Kevin Lankinen, like I'm still firmly in the camp here on a Friday that there will be an additional goaltender on the ice in Penticton with NHL experience. And I think you owe it to your players. Like, this is training camp. They want to face NHL shooters as well, right? Like, it doesn't really serve a purpose to have your best skaters out there facing guys that can go back to junior or are, on the sort of the borderline, the fringes of the AHL or the ECHL. So even if it's Antti Ranta on a pro tryout, this guy's got NHL experience. He's played for Rick Tocchet down in Arizona. I think you could go that direction. And I'm not sure how many offers or opportunities Kevin Lankinen has, but if you hear that, like, that's the clock ticking towards training camp. If the Canucks have lowballed him, I get that part of it. That's all part of negotiation, but I just don't know how many better offers he thinks will be coming his way to be in the National Hockey League. Either way, I'm expecting that there'll be a goaltender added to the roster here before camp.
Excellent. Lastly, Jeff, only because all 3 days we've talked about it this week, we've invoked your name. Quinn Hughes shooting for 20 goals, specifying Jake DeBrusk saying 25 to 35. What do you make of the spoken and now public goals for goal scoring? Yes, proclamations. It's Brock Besser from 2 years ago, Jeff.
Optimism abounds at this time of the year. They're all going to score 50. Look, the number of puck touches that Quinn Hughes gets in a game, for him to go from 17 to 20 seems absolutely doable. The power play over the second half, or at least from the All-Star break, we all saw that it cratered. If he could add a power play goal here or there, I think he can, again, bump his total from 17 to 20. So I think 20 is eminently doable if he's going to get to 100 points. And maybe that's raising the bar, but that's what this guy does for himself, is raise the bar. If he's going to get to 100, I think he's probably got to score 20 as a minimum. I think Garrett Carlson, when he got to 101, was 25 goals and 76 assists. So for Quinn Hughes, I love the fact, like, he goes home in the summer, he addresses his season. There wasn't much to pick at last year, but he said he was working on changing the angle and getting that shot off, beat the first guy, the high guy, and creating shooting lanes and all those types of things. We saw evidence of that last year. If he can continue to refine his game, I think 20 is well within his reach. And part of that is, if Elias Pettersson gets back to form, how many times can he set up Quinn Hughes? If Philip Hronek has a better second half, how many more times can he move the puck to Quinn Hughes? So I think there are ways for improvement here for Quinn Hughes in the hockey club. And Jake DeBrusk, 27 goals twice in the NHL. I don't think 30 is out of the question at all. Certainly over the course of the contract, I hope that there's a 30-goal season in there. But I do think that there are other ways that Jake DeBrusk is going to show his value to the hockey club, whether it's penalty killing, his speed, on power play, all those types of things. But just in terms of raw numbers, yeah, absolutely. I think Jake DeBrusk, let's set the bar. There's nothing wrong with setting the bar a little higher. I'm not saying 40, but I think 30 is certainly a target for a guy like Jake DeBrusk.
Awesome stuff. Jeff, thank you for this. Have a great weekend. You'll be in for Blake at one point next week, and we'll catch up then.
Sounds good. You guys enjoy all that the South Okanagan has to offer at this time of the year, which is plenty, including a hockey showcase. Make sure that you take in a little bit of the hockey showcase. And we'll catch up next week.